Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about opinions. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, should an experienced software engineer always have an opinion on how to build things? Mm, that is a tricky question. I would say no, depending a little bit on how we want to, how it manifests itself. Let me explain that a little bit. So something that I think is really, really important is it's a similar sort of thing you learn as you grow older, where in the start of your life, children usually only have one perspective, which is, of course, very naturally their own, and they think from their own perspective first and foremost, and then they grow a little bit older and they start getting a sensation of other people, but of course, depending on empathy and like disposition, we can talk about nature versus nurture, of course, but you get a sense of what benefits you and what benefits other people. And as the older you grow, and depending on how you evolve as a person, you start to see that some people stay this way forever, where like they sort of only think from their own perspective usually, and how they can contribute and what benefits, or like they look at things as them interacting with the world. And the people who grow a little bit more than that, you start to see that the world is made up of other people with similar sorts of ways of thinking, and you figure out that in some cases the best thing for you is not necessarily to have the mindset that this does not directly benefit me, but rather thinking in terms of the benefits of my neighbor will have an impact on me as well. It's similar to, if you think about it from a world perspective, how in a war, for example, a very large country or another country might benefit from helping out a country that might be a neighbor and is in a conflict with some other entity or something like that. Not because they themselves are being attacked, but rather because the stability of their neighboring country is very important to them. Think of the drug situation between Mexico and North America, for example, or like these days the Ukrainian situation, or so forth and so forth. And as a software developer, you, I think, should think about things in a similar sort of way, where in some cases it's actually better for you to not have an opinion on how to build things, not because you shouldn't have an idea of how to do something, but rather that instead of you, especially if you're like me, a real loudmouth, rather have the perspective that, yeah, I have solved this problem 1,000,000 times, but I have other teammates who have not. And it's actually a benefit to me if they get a chance to show off a little bit in front of the stakeholders as well. Because something that is very interesting that I think that a lot of people don't think about a lot because for some people this is the same thing as you sort of relinquishing power or missing an opportunity to shine yourself. And sure, to a certain point that is true, but the benefit that you gain is that you raise the confidence of the people who work with you and make it, you normalize that it might not just always be you who has to deal with everything. And this is more advanced techniques in management, for example, where the idea, if you've probably heard it before, delegate things that you don't have to do. And one of the main reasons behind that is because if everything is a complete pyramid structure, where everything just defers to you immediately, regardless of what it is, you will become a bottleneck. You will not be able to maintain an effectively working organization. You will start slowing things down just because you are always the only person everybody goes to, and you simply do not have the physical time, like the actual time, to deal with that sort of situation. And the problem is that if you have it's sort of like the dictator's problem. If you run everything like in the sense where you have to be involved in everything, you manage everything, that basically means that nothing can happen unless you are paying direct attention to it. And so the balancing act, well, if we talk about dictators, is okay. So you need people you can trust, yet will never be that will never betray you, if that makes sense. Who can do the things that you cannot possibly have time to do while you're doing all this other stuff. And here it is a very similar sort of a situation where if you might be the senior or the tech lead or whatever you might be, right, in the group, it might actually be a very good thing for you if you allow the less experienced software developers or people who may not have an opinion all the time to voice a few opinions, because if they do, you will help them practice being involved. And that helps both with the fact that it will potentially offload your responsibility to always be the person who has to deal with everything, making you less of a bottleneck or less of a critical resource, which, you can look at that in many ways, but it's very nice to be able to take a vacation without having to be on the phone all the time, or, having like an email box that is like 1,000 messages a day or things like that. And by just sharing that responsibility, you're actually not going to get much if you haven't made a habit of it, because as I said, if you're going to run things like a dictator or something like that, if you don't have people who know how to take the responsibility off your hands, and you've never trained them to do that, all that's going to happen is that you're going to tell that person that, hey, you have an opinion about this, or like, what is your thought, and so forth, and they're going to be very uncomfortable expressing anything because you haven't built up an environment where it's okay for somebody else to have an opinion. Because you are always the one who's having the opinion. You're always the one who's going to be the one who picks the direction, etc., etc. And the thing that you're looking for usually in as an experienced software developer is to, well, depending on what your personal agendas are and like what the needs of the company are, but I've always found that the best thing is for you is to relinquish control of that which does not matter so much, so that others can get into the habit and get some hands-on practice making decisions, even small decisions. It's sort of like, with your kids. You don't have to tell them every single little thing. Maybe some small decisions can be their decisions, because the impact of them getting it wrong, quote unquote, or doing it in some way, doing it in a way that you would maybe not have done, it's not the end of the world. You can always go and fix it because it's a low impact decision. And that, my friend, is what I believe that should be the guiding principle around having an opinion. You, as this experienced software developer, you should know what the critical decisions are where you really need to have an opinion, and you should share your experience if somebody asks for it for those smaller things that are going to be built that may not be super critical, that you are like the one who has the final say on that thing. So take the second seat in those scenarios and allow others to express their opinion, if that makes sense. But you should of course always try to have an idea of how would you do it, but you don't have to be the first one to share it if you see that you will actually give somebody else a chance to have an opinion. So what I want you to take away from this is that as a software developer, you should always, in my opinion, have the mindset at the very least that yes, you should have an opinion on how to build things based on your experience, but you should be very careful with being the one who's pushing that opinion first, because sometimes it is a very important decision that is going to be made around how things are going to be built, and your opinion as the more experienced software developers is very important because you have as I like to say, you are the most qualified and most appropriate person to listen to in that context. But that's always, in many cases, that might be true for a lot of situations, but in some situations there are people who may not be as experienced as you are, who are still qualified to make the thing that you're going to make, or create, or have an opinion, or make a decision, etc., etc. And it's generally a healthy thing for everybody if you help the people who may not be the most experienced software engineers in the team practice having opinion. Practice having them stand for their own beliefs and like sort of do something and actually being the one who's accountable for the outcome of that. Because if you don't help people practice that part, then you are always the one who's responsible for everything. And that is fun for a little while, but it gets completely unmaintainable as you get more and more responsibilities. and it's going to wear you out sooner or later. And in a situation when you realize that, oh shit, I have too much stuff, I need to fork off some stuff to other people, it's actually very hard sometimes to get people to actually take accountability for things that you usually used to do, because now they don't know. They haven't practiced being in charge. They haven't practiced being the one with the opinion. So now they're in this weird situation where they're going to come to you anyway and ask for second opinions and confirmation. It's sort of, as I said, it's like a child who you always told them what to do and how to clean their room and stuff like that, and now they don't know if they can put the toy in that box or that box, because you're always the one who's telling them which one is right. And if they can't feel confident in making their own decisions, well, then they're just a proxy for your decisions again. So that's my tip to you. Have an idea, have an opinion, but pick when it's appropriate for you to be the one who's making the decisions, and when it's a good idea to let someone else take care of something. Have a great day.